the station master in the center. The station master, otherwise Mr. Mac, was a popular character in the neighborhood. He possessed two social qualifications which invariably impressed the average English mind. He was an old soldier, and he was a man of few words. The conclave on the platform insisted on checking his opinion before it committed itself positively to an opinion of its own. A brisk fire of remarks exploded, as a matter of course, on all sides, but everybody's view of the subject ended interrogatively in a question aimed point-blank at the station-master's ears. "She's got him, hasn't she? She'll come back Mrs. Armadale, won't she? He'd better have stuck to Miss Milroy, hadn't he?" "Miss Milroy stuck to him? She paid him a visit at the great house, didn't she?" "Nothing of the sort. It's a shame to take the girl's character away. She was caught in a thunderstorm close by. He was obliged to give her shelter, and she's never been near the place since. Miss Gwilt's been there, if you like, with no thunderstorm to force her in. And Miss Gwilt's off with him to London in a carriage all to themselves, eh, Mr. Mac?" "Ah, he's a soft one, that Armadale, with all his money, to take up with a red-haired woman, a good 8 or 9 years older than he is. She's 30 if she's a day. That's what I say, Mr. Mac. What do you say?" "Older or younger, she'll rule the roast of Thorpe Ambrose. And I say, for the sake of the place, and for the sake of trade, let's make the best of it. And Mr. Mac, as a man of the world, sees it in the same light as I do, don't you, sir?" "Gentlemen," said the station-master, with his abrupt military accent and his impenetrable military manner, "she's a devilish fine woman, and when I was Mr. Armadale's age, it's my opinion, if her fancy had laid that way, she might have married me." With that expression of opinion, the station-master wheeled to the right, and entrenched himself impregnably in the stronghold of his own office. The citizens of Thorpe Ambrose looked at the closed door, and gravely shook their heads. Mr. Mac had disappointed them. No opinion which openly recognizes the frailty of human nature is ever a popular opinion with mankind. "It's as good as saying that any of us might have married her if we had been Mr. Armadale's age." Such was the general impression on the minds of the conclave, when the meeting had been adjourned and the members were leaving the station. The last of the party to go was a slow old gentleman, with a habit of deliberately looking about him. Pausing at the door, this observant person stared up the platform and down the platform, and discovered in the latter direction, standing behind an angle of the wall, an elderly man in black, who had escaped the notice of everybody up to that time. "Why, bless my soul!" said the old gentleman, advancing inquisitively by a step at a time. "It can't be Mr. Bashwood." It was Mr. Bashwood. Mr. Bashwood, whose constitutional curiosity had taken him privately to the station, bent on solving the mystery of Allan's sudden journey to London. Mr. Bashwood, who had seen and heard behind this angle in the wall what everybody else had seen and heard, and who appeared to have been impressed by it in no ordinary way. He stood stiffly against the wall, like a man petrified, with one hand pressed on his bare head, and the other holding his head. He stood with the dull flush on his face, and the dull stare in his eyes, looking straight into the black depths of the tunnel outside the station, as if the train to London had disappeared in it but a moment before. "Is your head bad?" asked the old gentleman. "Take my advice. Go home and lie down." Mr. Bashwood listened mechanically, with his usual attention, and answered mechanically, with his usual politeness. "Yes, sir," he said in a low, lost tone, like a man between dreaming and waking. "I'll go home and lie down." "That's right," rejoiced the old gentleman, making for the door. "And take a pill, Mr. Bashwood, take a pill." 5 minutes later, the porter charged with the business of locking up the station found Mr. Bashwood, still standing bareheaded against the wall, and still looking straight into the black depths of the tunnel, as if the train to London had disappeared in it but a moment since. "Come, sir," said the porter, "I must lock up. Are you out of sorts? Anything wrong with your inside? Try a drop of gin and bitters." "Yes," said Mr. Bashwood, answering the porter exactly as he had answered the old gentleman. "I'll try a drop of gin and bitters." The porter took him by the arm and led him out. "You'll get it there," said the man, pointing confidentially to a public house, "and you'll get it good." "I shall get it there," echoed Mr. Bashwood, still mechanically repeating what was said to him, "and I shall get it good." His will seemed to be paralyzed. His action depended absolutely on what other people told him to do. He took a few steps in the direction of the public house, hesitated, staggered, and caught at the pillar of one of the station lamps near him. The porter followed, and took him by the arm once more. "Why, you've been drinking already!" exclaimed the man, with a suddenly quickened interest in Mr. Bashwood's case. "What was it? Beer?" Mr. Bashwood, in his low, lost tones, echoed the last word. It was close on the porter's dinner time. But when the lower orders of the English people believe they have discovered an intoxicated man, their sympathy with him is boundless. The porter let his dinner take its chance, and carefully insisted Mr. Bashwood to reach the public house. "Gin and bitters will put you on your legs again," whispered this Samaritan, set right of the alcoholic disasters of mankind. If Mr. Bashwood had really been intoxicated, the effect of the porter's remedy would have been marvelous indeed. Almost as soon as the glass was emptied, the stimulant did its work. The long weakened nervous system of the deputy steward, prostrated for the moment by the shock that had fallen on it, rallied again like a weary horse under the spur. The dull flush on his cheeks, the dull stare in his eyes, disappeared simultaneously. After a momentary effort, he recovered memory enough of what had passed to thank the porter, and ask whether he would take something himself. The worthy creature instantly accepted a dose of his own remedy, in the capacity of a preventive, and went home to dinner as only those men can go home who are physically harmed by gin and bitters, and morally elevated by the performance of a good action. Still strangely abstracted, but conscious now of the way by which he went, Mr. Bashwood left the public house a few minutes later, in his turn. He walked on mechanically, in his dreary black garments, moving like a block on the white surface of the sun-brightened road, as Midwinter had seen him move in the early days of Thorpe Ambrose, when they had first met. Arrived at the point where he had to choose between the way that led into the town and the way that led to the great house, he stopped, incapable of deciding, and careless, apparently, even of making the attempt. "I'll be revenged on her," he whispered to himself, still absorbed in his jealous frenzy of rage against the woman who had deceived him. "I'll be revenged on her," he repeated in louder tones, "if I spend every halfpenny I've got." Some women of the disorderly sort, passing on their way to the town, heard him. "Hey, you old brute!" they called out, with the measureless license of their class. "Whatever she did, she served you right." The coarseness of the voice startled him, whether he comprehended the words or not.